sir.
Nice one. So let's just start with the immediate location, because it's impossible to ignore. I mean, we're literally in the garden, surrounded by fresh fruit. You've got the beach, Malibu, just down the hill. This is just an idyllic location full of history. So tell us how you got involved with Shangri-La.
I moved to the neighborhood and was looking for a place to work, and one of the bands I was working with found it and asked if I would come to a rehearsal, and I came to a rehearsal, and it was really kind of dingy at the time.
Yeah.
And had fallen into disrepair over the years. But it was the closest and most convenient place, and surprisingly, the stuff that came out of here really sounded good. We were surprised. We didn't know that it was going to sound as good as it did.
And you saved it too. I mean, you were saying someone was going to buy it and tear it down.
Yeah, the guy decided to sell it. I didn't really want to I didn't want to own a studio.
Yeah.
And
it's why it's such a thriving business.
But again, it really was a question of saving it, because someone was going to tear it down, just build a big house here.
Yeah.
So luckily, we preserved it.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing so, because just walking around and getting a quick tour of the place is amazing. I mean, you were saying that, obviously Bob Dylan's old tour bus at the back there, often using that while this is going on. You were saying that you did some mixing for Kanye's record in there.
Yeah, we did.
You've had such an incredible 12, 18 months. I mean, obviously, we'll get to your entire life, but let's talk about the recent past, because you've been involved in some fantastic records, and, I just brought up Kanye, let's start with that. You've talked quite openly about, the reduction of that record, about focusing it, bringing it down to its elements and stripping things away. Just give us a little more insight into what it was when he brought you into the equation.
There were loads of great ideas, and there were many, many tracks, and we listened to everything together. He originally came over and said, I want to come play my new album, and I thought we were going to listen to a finished album, and then we listened to about 3 hours of music, most of which didn't have vocals. And at the end of it, it's like, wow, so what's it going to be? I'm thinking it's a year away. And he's like, well, I'm putting it out in, I think it was like 6 weeks, 5 weeks, coming out in 5 or 6 weeks. It's like, really? And it's like, I said, I have another album that's a lot further along than this, and it's not coming out for probably 5 months. Yeah. And he's like, really? It's just a funny conversation, because it was completely normal to him.
Yeah.
It's just the way he works.
Yeah.
And then we listened to some music together, and other music, and at the end of it he said, would you just help me finish it? Let's go in together. And I think we could probably do it in 5 days, and ended up being more like 3 weeks, or a little over 3 weeks.
What's your honest impression of him? Because he's very honest about his impressions of everyone and everything else. Yeah. And I've been privy to that in conversation, and I love him.
I love him too. I think he's a great guy, super smart, and from a creative standpoint, I can't think of anyone who has come out, who has been more consistently great from the time they started making music until now. I can't think of anyone else. I think he's the most consistently great creative person in music today.
What is the common thread for you with rap music? What is the chromosome that you really think is truly important for your love of rap music?
It's very hard to, I don't know if it can be answered, because so much of it comes from the unique perspective of that particular artist. And so I guess it could be an honesty and a point of view that's particular to that person,
that
or
authentic
that group,
point of view, yeah.
Where it feels like it's not just good lyrics over good beats. It has to be more than good lyrics over good beats.
Which Eminem has. I mean,
100%.
I think he's probably, well, he's certainly the most honest, I think, that's ever been. I mean, in terms of
maybe the best rapper of any MC. He may be the best.
You have a unique perspective, having actually spent time producing him in the studio. I mean, I haven't had a chance to meet or talk to Dre about this, and other than that, really, it just comes down to Eminem. He does a lot of his own stuff here and there. What was that experience like, sort of having him in the booth, and what's he like to work with just purely on a recording level?
He's very hyper critical of detail, and hears the music in a very deep way, and hears internal rhythms in tracks, and writes words to work on so many different levels rhythmically within what's going on musically, to where if we change a little thing in the track to better the track, it might not work in his mind how it relates to what he's saying and how he's phrasing. His phrasing is so glued to the music, and written that way. Like, he just sees it as not just riding the flow. It's much more complex. And he's always writing. He's always writing, not when he's making an album. He's always writing in life. He's got these notebooks he carries around. And he's always writing. And he said to me he knows probably 99% of it, 98% of it will never be used for anything. But he wants his facility to be there so that when he needs to write something, it's like practice. You know, he's just master level practice all the time.
He's a rhyme fiend.
He is. He really is.
I always think that, you know, when you're working with artists, Rick, and I'm going to speak for them in a way, that when they come to a place like Shangri-La, they get to work with someone like you with your experience and the people that you've worked with and your love of music, that you know, they walk in as an excitable fan. You know, a lot of producers go the other way. It's true though, you know, and I think that goes from someone like Ed Sheeran, who's on the second album, all the way up, if I'm honest, to Metallica. And I always makes me laugh when I think about you working with someone like Black Sabbath, because I think that's probably the moment when the tables flip.
Yeah,
in a big way.
Well, in all of them. I mean, I'm really a fan of music, and luckily I get to work with these great artists. And every day, pretty much, in the studio, I have this feeling of like, I can't believe this person is so talented. I can't believe they're this good. You know, I can't believe it. I can't believe someone can sing this good. I can't believe someone can play this good.
I guess what I mean is that when you get together with Johnny Cash or with Black Sabbath, you might have a tiny bit of you that goes, I can't believe I'm in the room with...
Always.
You know.
Yeah, Neil Young, any of these people, it's like, you can't believe it. You can't believe... You know, some of these people, you get to meet them, you can't even believe that they walk the earth. You know, like, you meet Paul McCartney, it's like, that guy's alive walking the earth. He wrote all those songs. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
So let's talk about Sabbath.
Yeah.
Which is a record I'm sure you would, you know, dying to make through your whole life. I mean, what an important influence for you.
Yeah, I had a meeting with them probably, let's say about 15 years ago with the whole band. And we met at my house in town and talked about making a record, and they were very excited to do it at that time. And then they started writing together. And then it just never came together. They called one day, it's like, writing's not really, it's not really happening. And then they all went off and did their own things. And then I was surprised to get a call from them, whenever it was, 2 years ago, something, saying, we think the time's now, and we started doing a little bit of writing, and do you want to do this? Like, absolutely. Black Sabbath.
When you sit down and you get to work with a band like that and you look at all the time that's gone in between albums, how do you approach it differently to, say, working with an artist that you have a more consistent track record with? And you know, how did you feel about picking up on a band like that, you know, gave us some remarkable records, but they were decades ago, you know?
Yeah. I can't categorize the more grown-up artists as it works this way with them. It really is. I spend time with the artist and kind of see where they're at, and I try to imagine what them at their best is, and then try to set up whatever situations we can to allow that to happen. Is that we really have no control over it happening, is the reality. It's a frustrating job in many respects, because it's like fishing. You know, you can go out fishing, but you can't say, I'm going to catch 3 fish today. You know, it's like we have very little control over this process. It's magic, really, what's happening.
You caught so much fire from that Black Sabbath record. I mean, it literally, you said you wanted to make it feel like you picked up from where they left off.
Yeah, that was the goal. That was the goal.
I mean, you did it. I mean, that has to be in them to do that. They have to be ready, right, to go into a room like that.
100%. And
what happens if they're not?
A lot of the job also is the expectation. It's like setting up an expectation that we really can make a great Black Sabbath record that stands alongside their best work. I can remember having a conversation with Johnny Cash saying, on our first album, saying, we're going to make the best album you ever made. And he looked at me like I was insane. Like how could you even think that way? He felt like he hadn't made a good record in probably 25 years and had been discarded. You know, at the time that I met him, he was playing at dinner theaters and had been dropped from 2 labels, and nobody cared. So the idea of shifting that, reframing the experience to not not just, well, let's just do an album, but let's do whatever it takes for it to be the best album you've ever made. What would that sound like? How would that work? How much work would go into it? Are you willing to commit to that?
Yeah.
It's because it's not easy, and some artists don't like it, and I've worked with some artists where it hasn't worked out, where they just are not willing to do the work.
I wondered, because I can tell from spending time with you this morning and now, just, and listening to the music, how much you invest of your heart and your soul into the project to try and make it work as best as possible for the artist and to get the best. And I can only imagine with that kind of commitment comes an equal amount of heartbreak when it doesn't pan out.
Absolutely, but it really is like it all stems from the relationship with the artist and finding that place where together we're working to make this thing, this unbelievable thing, and there are no limitations that we put in the way of that happening.
You've quite rightly said that it's very different for every artist, and that's why each record is different and so great.
100%.
But you talked about getting to know the artist and getting the relationship moving with the artist to get them to the place where they feel the confidence and they feel the trust in the process. Does it get personal? I know with Johnny, it sounded like you guys obviously struck up an incredibly important friendship. I'm sure started with those conversations.
Absolutely, and it often gets very personal. It doesn't always, but it often gets very personal, and we end up being very close.
Yeah.
The goal is to create a setting where an artist can be completely vulnerable and feel completely free to be themselves 100% with no shame or feeling of needing to perform a certain way and no expectation. Just really a safe place to be naked, basically. Show their innermost soul. And sometimes it's, as simple as not having anyone else, not allowing anyone to visit the studio. Sometimes when friends are around, an artist wants to perform for the friends. And for some artists, having friends around gets a better performance out of them.
Yeah.
For other artists, it does the exact opposite.
Yeah.
So it's like really reading the situation, seeing what's right for that artist, and experimenting. So much of it is experimentation. Very rarely do I go in with a preconception of what it's going to be, other than really good and know that it'll be as long of a journey as it needs to be for it to be really good.
And your journey has been incredible. Not just musically, but personally as well. Today you just seem totally at peace, and you've got this incredible creative space, an amazing place in the world to live. But you were born and raised in New York, and you were a punk, and it was a hardcore upbringing in terms of musically.
Absolutely.
What a journey. So when you first started listening to music, and you first discovered that the passion, the power of it, what was it? What was the genre? What was the music?
The Beatles was the first thing when I was probably 5 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. The Beatles and the Monkees were sort of the thing. And then I probably stopped listening to music by the time I was 7 or 8. I got into magic, and I started learning about magic and being a magician. And then I got back into music in junior high school, and it was, at that time, Aerosmith, AC/DC, Ted Nugent. Hard rock was the first thing. And then that morphed into when punk rock happened. So more I was listening to the Clash and the Sex Pistols at the same time as the hard rock, but it wasn't really until the American hardcore, Minor Threat and Black Flag, and those felt more relatable to me just because of what they were singing about. Really, they were singing about more like personal stuff, whereas the English bands tended to talk more about like class struggle and things that we didn't really experience here in America, so it seemed more foreign. Like I didn't understand why that was something to yell about when I was a kid. But Minor Threat singing about, a friend lying to you, or that was a very real, relatable feeling.
And you wanted to participate? You were always a fan, but you felt the urge to go and form bands. And
yeah, I always played and. Felt like I wanted to be part of it. I never felt like I was particularly good at any part of it, but I enjoyed it and was always passionate about it.
You know, there's something that was written about in an article I read, and I'm not sure if it's true, you have to qualify one way or the other, but I thought it was fascinating, which was that during one of the first shows that you guys played, I think it was at CBGB's, that there was an incident that it turned out that you'd kind of said to your friends, like, let's stage something, and then your dad had come down and gone, oh, you guys get out of this place. Is that true?
It is true.
And what I loved about that was the fact that, you know, your heart is completely and utterly into music, but you understood how to get attention.
Yeah, and I like the idea of, I've always also appreciated sort of the theatrical nature of things. And that was like, especially in the early Beastie Boys, we were really trying to push those buttons. And we were probably influenced, like at the time, we were really into Monty Python and we were really into Steve Martin. And
I heard wrestling as well. I heard you're a big fan of
I
wrestling.
always loved pro wrestling. And it's, you know, it's a ridiculous world. It's a very over-the-top, theatrical, crazy world. And so those were inspirations that sort of filtered in. And that's where the kind of more theatrical side of it, you know, the Beasties, we used to do really confrontational shows in the Beasties. And it was funny. It was just ridiculous.
It makes perfect sense, you know, when you think about some of the music that you're making, the way it was being presented in the early Def Jam days as well. You know, it was hard and it was tough and it was very concrete and it was like, it'll beat you down to listen to, but there was a cartoon nature to it as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like the songs that, there are some really offensive songs on the first Beastie Boys album, and since then they've felt bad about those songs. When in reality, when we were doing it, we knew this isn't how we feel. These are ridiculous, funny songs. You know, these are the reason they had the power they did was because of how ridiculous and offensive they were. It wasn't anything to own. We saw the same thing actually happen to Black Flag. Black Flag had that song TV Party. And when they put it out, originally, what that song was about was sort of a sarcastic song about people who just sit around and watch TV all day while we're going out to change the world. It didn't say that in the song, but that's what the message of the song was. And then when the song got popular, it went from the people at the show changing from the people who were in on the joke to people who were coming to celebrate a TV party.
Thought it was a slacker anthem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which it wasn't.
Yeah.
And same is true with the Beasties, where there were these songs that were we knew it was funny, but some people, and I've met some rappers who were like, I can't believe, you know, you guys weren't smoking dust and like doing all the stuff that the record said, you know, smoking crack and which we weren't.
Did it make you want to? Did that kind of raise the honesty game for you in music and like, okay, the humor's cool, this is fun, but if we continue just making records like this, then it's going to be a whole world of preconceptions and misunderstandings. And did it kind of teach you a little lesson at that point, or you didn't care?
I don't think so. I think it's whatever's right for that particular artist. Like it was years later we did Baby's Got Back with Sir Mix-a-Lot, which was again a ridiculous song.
Yeah.
And but really, you know, I really like it. You know, I like what it is.
We're going to spend about 20 minutes talking about that song. So. Let's talk about Def Jam, you know, and because obviously it's a part of your life, it's a huge part of your legacy. But as a label, as a brand, it continues. Yeah. You know, it's incredible. That logo is still incredibly iconic. Did you know when you designed it, when you looked at the Def Jam logo and you put the turntable on there, you were pushing for that?
I had no idea.
That's crazy.
No, I mean, I thought in terms of I like iconic logos and I wanted to make something beautiful, but I never thought anybody would ever see it, ever. You know, and same with the records we made in the early days. We didn't make them thinking, oh, this is going to change the world, or I can't wait for everybody to hear it. It was more like, I know my friends will like this, and if 500 people hear it, that's amazing. You know, if we can sell enough of these to get to make another one, we've succeeded.
So what happened when I Need a Beat, when LL Cool J blew up and things you realized? I mean, obviously you'd made, you know, It's Yours by then. You'd integrated yourself well and truly into the community by making a dope record. Yeah. But then you started to have success. Def Jam started to sell copies.
Yeah. But again, we were in college, probably 20 years old at the time, and I don't think it ever really registered. It was just sort of, we were completely absorbed with music and making music, and the fact that people liked it was cool, but it didn't affect anything that we were doing. It just...
When did you move out of the dorm room? At what point did that get too small?
Late. Like, I didn't move out of the dorm. Def Jam was in the dorm room for at least 18 months.
crazy.
At least 18 months.
Or just stacked with records.
There were both my dorm room was stacked with records and a full PA system and DJ setup, and it was a tiny cell. It was ridiculous.
How did you not get kicked out of the university for running
Came very close.
payola, huh?
There was actually the dorm had a governing body.
Right.
And they called a meeting of the governing body for the first time since the dorm had been. There had never been a reason to call a meeting of this governing body.
And then you walk in,
and
they
they called the meeting to decide whether they were going to throw me out.
That's amazing.
And
you were proud of that.
Luckily, they didn't throw me out.
You were thrilled by
that.
Well,
It was interesting, but I really didn't want to get thrown out because we had a very good thing going.
But obviously, you're conscious of the fact that at that time, the records you're making, the fun you're having, you're still that punk rock kid, right?
Absolutely. It was a complete punk rock. The initial energy of Def Jam was a more urban version of punk rock. That's how we saw it.
What was Russell Simmons like back then?
Coolest guy. Just he's about 5 years older than me. He already had produced Jimmy Spicer and Run DMC records and Curtis Blow records, and there weren't, as we were discussing, there weren't that many rap records in those days, and his name was on a lot of them.
Yeah.
So it was really a big honor for me to meet him even then, because he was on all these records. I was a kid in school, so getting to meet him, it was like he was the first person I met really in the record business, really in the record business. And if you compared him to people who were really in the record business, they wouldn't think that he was in the record business. But from where we were, he was actually involved, and that was more than anyone we knew.
You seem to be the perfect partnership for Def Jam at that moment in time, and then things kind of went wrong. And I mean, I've never spoken to you about it.
Yeah.
What was the cause for the?
It didn't really go wrong.
What happened?
What happened was we had this incredible success over a 5-year period, like wild success. And in the growth, when things get big, it gets very confusing. And I was, as I say, 20, 21 at the time. God. Russell was 26. You don't really know how to handle the pressures of this big thing, and we didn't really have any structure in the way things worked. So we were often played against each other by other people, and it was just frustrating. And then anytime me and Russell were together, we were always cool. But when we were forced to make decisions independently, a lot of times he wouldn't like my decision and I wouldn't like his decision, but there was no system to deal with that. We were just trying to put out a lot of fires because there were a lot of fires. And eventually I thought, I love this guy, and for the sake of our relationship, maybe it's better if we're not partners, because the partnership was starting to we had to like everything the other guy did. So we also now in retrospect could have, if we knew more, if we were adults, we probably would have found a way to better communicate, and that would have been fine. Would have been completely fine.
Things would have been different, though. You.
Yeah, it was meant to be.
It was meant to be.
Meant to be, and our interests were different. Like, I always cared about making great music. Period. And Russell always cared about being a successful businessman, and sometimes those roads didn't go together, and those were often the things that we would argue about, like the art has to come first, and sometimes it wouldn't, and when I understood his business reason for it, he was right. My nature was, it's got to be about the art.
Dan Charnas wrote in a book that you just closed the door on your apartment in New York and flew to Los Angeles, flew west, and kind of just left it.
That's true. I actually didn't. It's not well. It wasn't a decision like that. I flew to Los Angeles to work on some music, and just didn't come back. That would be more accurate.
Yeah, it's less dramatic. True.
It's the truth. It wasn't like I decided I'm getting out of here.
Yeah.
It was more of a. I was starting an album. There was a movie called Less Than Zero, and we did soundtrack for that, and that was based in L.A. So we made all those records in L.A. and I was out here for a couple of months. And then at the end of that, I was living in a hotel. I ended up living in a hotel for 9 months. I would drive around the Hollywood Hills because I came from a place that was very flat, and seeing these houses built in these hills was just an amazing thing. So every weekend, I went out with a local friend of mine, and we would just drive the hills and look at houses, and just like, it was just so cool. It was just such a new experience for me, seeing this. And I always liked the music of Laurel Canyon. So we'd look around Laurel Canyon, drive around, and imagine,
Neil Young.
Yeah, Neil Young being there, and
yeah.
Crosby, Stills and Nash, and what that world was like. Carole King, these amazing songwriters.
Probably needed as well at the time, given that you're coming out of the back of what has been, like you say, you didn't fall out, but stressful times towards the end of Def Jam.
I would say it was stressful, but there was no real falling out. It was really, and I can remember going out to lunch with Russell and saying, I feel like we'd be better friends if we weren't partners. Do you want to leave the company? And he's like, I don't want to leave. It's like, okay, I'll leave. It was like as simple as that.
When you did leave, I mean, it was in such a fantastic position, and rap music was firmly ensconced as the developing mainstame art form from the underground.
Yeah.
You'd had a huge role in to play in that with License to Ill, Run DMC, your work with Run DMC.
Yeah.
Are they the greatest? I mean, okay. Tough question.
A lot of questions.
Do I even ask that question?
It's impossible to answer. How could you answer that?
I know, but we don't stop asking each other, friends and everyone else, all the time.
Yeah.
In terms of impact,
I will say that at the time that I started making hip hop records, the idea of someday getting to work with Run DMC would have been just it.
They're a cannon.
That would have been it.
The energy.
Yeah.
You're working with them and getting that energy. And I know we're in Los Angeles now in the grand scheme of things, but I'm not ready to just fly over there. I got to go back to New York for a second. Just talk about Run DMC.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, those three guys, the two MCs and J Master J, I mean, the three of them, what was it like?
They really lived the hip hop life. They were, what's interesting about Run DMC is that the groups that came before them didn't really own the hip hop culture. Like if you looked at Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, they dressed more like Parliament, or Africa Bambaataa and Soul Sonic Force, more like Parliament. Like their influences were style influences, and often musical influences were more rooted in an older form of music. Run DMC were the first actual b-boys, where the way they dressed,
that's how they hung out.
Yeah, the wearing the shell-toe Adidas and the warm-up suits, and artists didn't wear warm-up suits on stage in those days. They wore leather suits and feathers. So it was radical to see these guys who looked like they could be hanging out in the park on stage and singing about different things. And the music was different. The music was more, it wasn't R&B, which up till that time, most rap records were still R&B records with guys rapping on them. Run DMC were the first where it was like
drum machine,
real hip hop records. And they were still on the slick side and great. And then with something like It's Yours, it was more of the street side of it, of, made by people who didn't know what they were doing. Whereas Run DMC had engineers and it was more professional. And the records I was making at the time, it was more like punk rockers making hip hop, which is different. It was just a different aesthetic.
So you move out to Los Angeles and you decide to stay. Well, you go out there to make a record and decide to stay.
Yeah.
And from there, the American saga begins. And, Slayer, obviously, you'd already begun to work with Slayer.
Yeah.
Made Rain and Blood, absolutely incredible record.
We were talking about short albums before. I think Rain and Blood might be like 19 minutes long. It's unbelievable. And it's probably an hour of music played in 19 minutes.
I know. And I mean, by now we're getting to know that you have this broad aesthetic towards music, this broad love of music as a producer. And I think any hardcore fan of you knows that that's the way it's going to go. Setting up American and moving forward, did you have an idea as to what you wanted it to be?
No idea. Just music I liked. It was always about music I liked, finding good things, and whatever moved me.
In amongst those, I mean, the first few years of American were kind of it was a fascinating catalogue of artists, you know, because you had the heavy side of things, and you had Danzig, but you also had like Andrew Dice Clay,
Yeah.
you know, stand-up comedian who was about the most offensive guy on a microphone at the time.
Absolutely. I thought he fit right in. He fit right in with our aesthetic.
And then you obviously you had Sir Mix-a-Lot and Baby Got Back as well.
Yeah.
So,
And the Black Crows were on the label,
That's right.
and the Jayhawks, and really cool bands.
what were people, I mean, in Los Angeles where the industry exists and people you're talking to, you know, how are they taking this? You know, someone walks in with this kind of catalogue of artists, unheard of.
Yeah, honestly, not well. At pretty much every step of the way, people tried to talk me out of what I was doing next. You know, I can remember when I formed American and being partners with Geffen Records. They really wanted me to make rap records because we had all the success with rap. It's like, why would you do this? Like, why do you want to sign a comedian? You know, why do you want to sign the Ghetto Boys? Or that was another one that was like sort of not everybody liked the Ghetto Boys.
Yeah. I think musically, one of the major turning points for anyone who's followed you and your work is Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
As you started working with Johnny Cash. Talk us through the beginning of that.
The way it happened was, it was interesting. The label was relatively new. All of the artists that I'd been working with were kind of young of the moment, First Records, you know, or Glenn Danzig had, you know, he was in the Misfits, but this was his first, you know, new band, first record. It was, Slayer was still a pretty young band. They'd made maybe 2 independent albums. So it was a lot of young people, and I just thought it'd be interesting to find a grown-up artist who's really talented and just who hasn't been doing good work for a while, and help them regain what they were. And the first artist who came to mind was Johnny Cash. And then I arranged to go see him play, and he was everything that I thought he was. He was amazing, and had basically been discarded by the you know, the country community and written off. And
What was his impression of you, do you think? Did he ever tell you?
I think he just thought I was crazy. You know, he really didn't. I know that he liked that I was so enthusiastic on his behalf from the beginning. But actually, on the way home from his funeral, a friend of his told me a story, and he said, "I'll always trust Rick because he believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." And I remember it made me cry when he told me that. So I saw who he was. You know, I saw who he was, and I saw that he'd given up, and that's probably why the music wasn't what it could be. So we spent a lot of time together, and I would just get him to play me music and play me, you know, sit in my living room, play me songs, play me the songs you love. And songs you've written, songs you haven't written, new songs, old songs, songs you remember when he used to pick cotton as a kid. Tell me the songs you remember singing when you were picking cotton. He would play me a song. Or what was your favorite blues song? What was your favorite gospel song?
You're getting his trust, and you're getting to know him through...
Yeah, and I got to learn his taste through that process, because part of the adventure was to find songs for him to sing as well. So I wanted to see what were the songs that resonated with him throughout his life, as a starting point for looking for songs.
You know, Johnny Cash was a very famously spiritual man, you know, who had his own relationship with God, but sang about it, talked about it, and you know, I think it was obviously very important to him. At this point, when you were working with him, had you begun your spiritual journey? Had you begun?
Luckily, my spiritual journey began when I was very young. I started meditating when I was 14, so that has played a tremendous role in my life. It has really formed who I am, I'd say.
They say that meditation, in terms of one of the many benefits of it, is it helps to shut things off, to turn things off. Without it, would you have had trouble doing that? Do you have the kind of brain that becomes obsessive and compulsive about what you're doing at the time?
Absolutely. Yeah, it would be very difficult, and it also allows you, it builds up the muscle to allow you to focus intently and look very, very deeply into something. And so you develop patience, and patience is really helpful in this process, in making music and working with artists. And
was it important to Johnny Cash, that you shared in spirituality with him?
It turned out to be an important factor. I don't think it was on our meeting. It wasn't an important factor, and it wasn't. It was our relationship started being about music, and then just the fact that we both were interested in spiritual things kind of came to light through the relationship, and I'm sure deepened our relationship.
You know, one of the great things about being a record producer and being a music fan and someone who makes taste their living and their life, you know, is you get to build relationships with people that are ongoing, and you get to see them grow. And one band really springs to mind for me. And can you guess who that is?
Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, you know, the Chili Peppers for me and you have experienced an awful lot.
Absolutely.
When you began working with them, what were they like?
Well, the first time I met them, they'd asked me to produce an album 2 before the one that we did. And I met them, I went to a rehearsal with Adam Horovitz from the Beastie Boys, Ad Rock. And I remember it was a bad vibe. It was a bad vibe in the room, and you could see that the musicians didn't trust each other. That was the feeling in the room, mistrust. And I'd never really been around that before. It was like a toxic feeling. And later I learned that it was a drug thing, but I didn't know. I hadn't really been around that. And then the next time I met them, 2 years later, maybe 3 years later, they had all gotten sober. And it was an entirely different experience. They were different people. And that was when we started working together, and we made, the first album we made was Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
What a record. I mean, up at the Houdini house.
Yeah.
Which, do you still own that?
Yeah.
Is it haunted?
No one really knows.
You hear some stories about that place.
It's true. All that's true. We don't really know. Weird stuff happens there.
Great music gets made there.
Absolutely.
You know, more music than we'd ever heard from the Chili Peppers in one sitting before, and sides to them that we never believed that they could ever come up with, like Breaking the Girl, things like that, obviously Under the Bridge.
Yeah.
Playful moments, but also very deep, very heartfelt moments. You know, at that point, with John still in the band the first time, firing on all cylinders, just incredible
100%.
to work with.
Perfect. They were peak moment.
And since then, obviously, you've been able to work with him consistently, and John's left, he's come back, he's left again. You know, that band really are on one of life's fullest journeys, aren't they? It never goes that smooth for them all the way through, if you can even define that.
No, they really do. There's tremendous suffering through their process, and it's amazing that they still stand strong. It's unbelievable. The
chemistry between, I'm going to include John in this, even though he's no longer in the band, with those 4 people, and the additional people that join the band through Flea and Chad and Anthony. Yeah. How would you, having worked so closely with them, just describe what's unique about their chemistry? Because that's the most important thing about being in a band is the flow. Yeah, they really love each other. They have a brotherly love of each other, and their passion for music, it goes beyond. You know, Flea's maybe the best bass player in the world, and all he does is practice bass. It's like he's already the best, and he's still. I remember I called him. I said I had a great drummer here one day, and I said, do you want to jam with this drummer? He's like, I haven't played in a few days. I don't think I'm up to it. Like, and in his mind, it's like if he doesn't practice for 3 hours, he's not ready to really do it. And it's that sort of the dedication to musicianship. And all of the members have dedication to the musicianship, and in Anthony's case, it's just a love of music, just a real, and he's a great front man. I want to talk about System. Yeah, great. Because there's a band that I think a lot of people listening and watching this now will be really interested to know what it's like working with them, because, I mean, you've got 4 characters in a band, all of them very strong characters, and the music they make is very strong and very unique. Absolutely. Just talk us through, tell us some stories about System of a Down and how it's been like to work with them. Yeah. I remember going to see them the first time I went to see them play. They played at the Viper Room in LA. It was packed, and 200 people. And sold out. Sold out. And I remember watching the show and just laughing. I laughed the whole time. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, but in a good way. It wasn't like laughing like, what a joke. It was just so over the top and so extreme, and like
Armenian folk dancing with heavy metal riffs and wild political lyrics and screaming. It was crazy music, and usually a lot of heavy music falls into a similar thing. I'm not going to say it's interchangeable because it's not, but there are certain rules of heavy metal, let's say, that everyone sort of follows those rules.
It's a loyal fan base.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah.
And System of a Down were a heavy band, you could say a heavy metal band, who didn't follow those rules. So they didn't have the rhythms that you'd hear in a typical, you wouldn't hear a Metallica rhythm, you'd hear a System of a Down rhythm, which was different, dun, 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 like different gallops and different, and it's rooted in their Armenian heritage. So they took elements from folk music and brought that into heavy metal. And I remember at the time, I'd never heard anything like it. And I can remember people, while there were those of us who loved them fanatically, people hated them.
Yeah.
People hated them. I can remember the big radio station in LA is K-Rock.
Yeah.
And Kevin Weatherly's the program director of K-Rock. And I remember him saying, System of a Down is a band we will never play on our station ever. 100%. I don't care what happens. They're not, that doesn't fit on our station. And then a year later, it was the #1 band on the station.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. They clearly didn't fit, but they were so good that they transcended not fitting. And those are the artists that I like the best. Those are my favorite artists. The ones that they don't really fit anywhere. They're not another in this mold. Rage Against the Machine is another great example. It's like Rage Against the Machine, they don't sound like anyone. No one before Rage Against the Machine sounded like Rage Against the Machine. And a lot of people didn't like them for that reason. But those are the revolutionary bands. Those are the ones that changed the world.
One of those bands, I believe, who had made some remarkable records and totally gave heavy metal a kick up the ass was Slipknot.
Yeah, incredible.
That band live are unbelievable. It doesn't always work out that you see eye to eye with the artist. You have an incredible track record. A lot of producers have a much worse one. Yeah. How do you feel when sometimes when an artist comes out and is vocal about the process? Well,
it's interesting because if you talk to the Clown, who's sort of the leader, Sean, of Slipknot, he and I are so on the same page. It's unbelievable. And not everybody in the band felt the same way, which is, it's all cool. I still think the album we made's maybe their best album. I know for me it's their best album. I know a lot of fans really like it. So I know that I think Corey didn't like the way we went about doing it.
Well, you hear different different assessments of your way of working. I know it's different for everyone. Sometimes you're in the booth and you're absolutely hand-on in the control room, totally hands-on. Other times you'll leave a band to work on their own. What's the philosophy behind that?
It's whatever's right in that moment for that band. And I don't feel like I want to hold a band's hand through the process. I want to be there whenever I need to be there to make it better. If things are going along in a way where they've got this, I want to hear them get this, and I want to hear it. And then I listen to it after, and then we talk about, you really got it, or you got it 80%, let's fix this part. And it just depends. The parts that I'm always there for is the basic tracking part, which is where we create this foundation to build on. And to me, that's the key to the whole thing. Like, if that's right, you can try a lot of different things. When it comes time to do guitar solos, I might not, like on an Audio Slave record, I might say to Tom Morello, just, do a bunch of solos and then play me what you've got. And then I listen back and it's like, okay, these 5 are really great. These others are not good enough. And sometimes it'll just be do more, or sometimes it'll be, let's do them together. It's really whatever's needed. But I give a tremendous, I trust the artists I work with, and I like them to feel like they're making this thing themselves. I don't want them to feel like they're making my record. I want them to feel like this is their record, and to be invested in it in a very personal way. It's different. It's different when you, and I've had that early in my career. That was a flaw of the way I worked, was that I wanted it my way, you know? And it led to not good relationships with the early bands I worked with because it had to be my way. And I've learned through making a lot of records and collaborating that it can be much better than my way. I didn't know that in the beginning. Now I know I have a way, but it may not be the best way, and I want to hear everybody else's way, maybe before I even suggest my way, because member number two's idea is the best idea. Another thing is we never try to judge an idea based on the description of the idea. We always musically try an idea, it's a pretty important point. And I can think of a time when I'll say, the bridge in this song isn't good enough. Can we write a new part? And then the artist will say, oh yeah, I have an idea. We can do it like this. And they'll give me a description of what it is. And it sounds terrible. Like the description sounds terrible. It's like, great, can't wait to hear it. And then they do it, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
And the reason is it's very difficult to explain a musical idea. If I tell you something I'm hearing and I describe it to you, the thing you hear is going to be completely different than the thing I'm hearing. So we never rely on that, the explanation being what it is. It's always, show it to me. Let me hear it. And
if it's terrible, do you say,
yeah,
it's terrible?
I might. Depends on my relationship with the artist. I mean, I know that like Chad from the Chili Peppers makes jokes about like, we'll be in there and we'll be playing our hardest, playing our hearts out and thinking this is the greatest thing we've ever done. And then we finish the track and we look into Rick, and Rick's like, so it really depends on the nature of the artist. Some artists really like, especially bands, like a sarcastic banter.
Because humor's important, I think, especially if you're going to be the bearer of some difficult news. Sometimes it's good to be able to be
again,
playful
it just
with
depends on the artist. Certain artists you have to be very direct, and it's a delicate thing. It really depends on the artist. Everyone's different.
Has there been one album in particular that's been really, you can think of, that's been really challenging to see all the way through to the end, but you're obviously incredibly proud of the results, but it was very difficult?
None are coming to mind. If you ask me that again later, maybe it'll come up. But offhand, I can't think of anything. If I was looking at a discography, I would probably.
Well, I'm not surprised because I looked at your
recognize
discography this morning again to get a brush up. It's been insane.
It's a lot of music.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Well, and the diversity of it. I mean, working with Shakira.
Yeah.
How was that?
Great. She's amazing.
What made you want to work with Shakira? Because I know how talented she is. Everyone does.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with a pop artist, you're sort of guilty by association.
Yeah.
You put Shakira next to the not so good pop artist on the radio, and it's hard to shake that perception.
Absolutely. She's unique in that world, in that she's competing with all these manufactured pop artists, and she's not a manufactured pop artist. Or at the time that we got together, she was essentially, and another artist like this is Lady Gaga, who is essentially a rock musician, a singer in a rock band. That's essentially who they are, who write their own songs, know exactly how they want it to be, have a vision of what they do, and they're the artist. They're not the singer. Then there are other pop artists who are the singer, and then they get the best track from the producer, and then someone writes good lyrics for them, and then they sing it. Shakira's not like that. Gaga's not like that. They are the artist, and I like artists.
Are there artists that got away? I mean, you spoke recently about NWA. Are there artists that you've never worked with that you would love to work with, or perhaps you wish you had had a chance to work with?
Yeah, I would have loved to have worked with NWA. I would have loved to think of who else. I loved LCD Sound System. Sad they broke up. That would have been a band I would have loved to make music with. Thought they were fantastic. And then obviously ones that have passed away, it'd be great to make a Beatles record.
Imagine you with Nirvana.
Incredible.
It would have been unbelievable.
Yeah.
Have you ever worked with Dave Grohl?
We've been in the studio together. Let me think if we've actually ever recorded anything together.
I mean, Rick Rubin, Foo Fighters album.
I I feel like he may have played on a Tom Petty session we did, but I honestly can't remember.
So the new era of American recordings, now you've emerged from being involved with Columbia Records, and you've taken hold of American again. And
Yes.
and how is it different to the first time around? I mean, you've changed obviously as a person, and has much changed in the way you want to
Not
make
really.
records?
It's always been the same. I've always been a record producer. I've always had a label. I've always looked for things I liked and just tried to work with artists that I love. And if they're someone new and available, I would sign them and try to make their records as good as we can and put them out on the label. And if they're a big artist on a label already, then I'll work with them in that capacity.
Records to look forward to. Ed Sheeran, you did work with him. He's great.
Fantastic.
We're all big fans of him.
Lovely guy.
Super cool guy. He said that, what he really loved about working with you was that you made it a performance again, and that he felt he'd spent too much time trying to carve the songs with people, and you just put him in a room with a loop pedal and said, just sing them.
Yeah. I saw him play live, and I loved him live. And I thought what he's doing is so unique and so original. And if you took a more traditional track and have him sing on it, that's not what's good about when you see him live.
Yeah.
And I thought the closer we could get to what makes him him, the better it would be. And that was the goal with the songs. Was what I don't want to know what the version that sounds good on the radio sounds like. I want to know what the Ed Sheeran version sounds like. I want to know, you as an artist, what do you sound like, and what more maximizing what makes him different than everybody else on the radio, instead of trying to minimize and make him fit. It's like, I don't want him to fit. I want him to sound like him, uniquely him.
That's a performance-based methodology towards producing. That's what you do. You put people in the room and say, right, let's get the closest thing to who you are, as you just said, that we could possibly do that. And yet, in this day and age, we're dealing in a very tech-heavy world where every single, frame of music can be itemized and broken down and positioned perfectly and everything else. I mean, what is your attitude towards that kind of recording technique as well, given that you don't have to do it that way, but it exists?
And I love programmed music as well. I love Kraftwerk. I love James Blake. And that's much more machine driven, and I love it. Absolutely love it. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. It's really about each artist. What is the artist's voice? What's their, and when I say voice, what's their sound? What's their trip? What makes them special? What's unique to them? And how can I help bring that out and support that, as opposed to, I have a great idea how to make my version of what they do. It's the furthest thing from that.
I mean, you said you always wanted to make great music, and business wasn't necessarily the thing that was driving you, but in your own way, you've been a businessman, obviously, and very successful at it, and also worked with large business and large companies, Columbia Records, at a time when music was changing in the way people were discovering music, enjoying music, treating music. Give us your insight into where it is and where you think it might be going, because I know you love to make music, but it's important that we kind of know.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any, much like making music, there's no right way for it to happen, and it's whatever's right for any particular artist. And I will say, I'm an independent-minded person, yet there are very few examples of totally independent artists who've had the impact on the world in the way that the artists who have relationships with big companies and muscle can do. And my main concern is making the best music and having anyone who likes it know about it and have the chance to be part of that. And I've not yet seen the independent side completely be able to take it to that fruition. Even in the case of Radiohead, they were already on, a major label, and they were broken through a major label. So for them to then leave and do things independently, it's different.
They used it as the platform, the jump off. Yeah.
Exactly. For an artist starting, again, there are too few examples, and even for the best examples you can come up with, they don't seem to have the same cultural significance musically on the world yet. Now, again, I'm completely open to it happening. I'm just looking at, I just haven't seen it yet.
I've been dying to ask you a question, and I know you'll take it the right way.
Yeah.
How important...
It's a scary setup.
I'm sitting here, do you see why I set up like that? All of a sudden I've gone from like, I'm basically half
Scary
asleep
setup.
asking you questions about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'm like, Rick, I've got a question.
You may not like this one.
No, it's a good one. It's a good one. How important, apart from the comfort and the way that you feel it looks, has the beard and the way you are been towards breaking down barriers amongst people, certainly in things like hip-hop or worlds that you've had to go into and say, I'm a fan and I want to make the best record I can. And if they look at you and go, who is this crazy dude right here?
I couldn't answer that. You'd have to ask the people on the other side, because it's not a premeditated thing. I just decided, when I was in college, I decided to stop shaving one day, and this is what has happened. It was not a, I'm going to have this beard, or it didn't work like that. So many of the things, so many of the things along the path of my life have not been choices I've made, but just things that they've really just happened. I feel like I'm a passenger in this.
You learn to let go early on, as much as you can.
Absolutely.
You live a rich life, man, and I don't mean monetarily. I mean, it's just incredible.
Unbelievable. Can't believe it. I still can't believe it.
How important does gratitude play a part in that?
100%. We give thanks every day. We do gratitude lists, and beautiful.
It's been lovely talking about music with you, man. And
Same.
It's been so nice hanging out here. And you know, I know you've got a session. What are you doing this afternoon?
Today, Kanye West is coming in, and we're starting looking at vocal ideas for things for the next album.
Incredible. Well, we can't wait to hear it as always and everything that you do.
Cool.
Thank you, man.
Pleasure.